My name is Alejandro Alvarez. I go by FK Arts as well. It kind of just became about collecting pieces and collaging them in a way that I'd never done before. And it was very focused on Lethbridge and history and connection and relationships. Nostalgia was a main theme, and it fit really nicely when the vinyl wrap project kind of came about, that I was like, oh, I didn't create these pieces for this, but it made perfect sense to transition. The sheets, like I used these metal newsprint sheets for the base, acting as like the canvas or whatever, and those were given to me like 6 years ago maybe, and they were from like the Lethbridge Herald, like from, I don't even remember, it was like the 30s and 40s. Like you can see like the ads for like agricultural equipment or whatever else for some of the community stuff like the YMCA. And so it was interesting that even though I'm not even showing that and that's on the back, that even that was just like this locally sourced thing. It's interesting. I haven't really processed it like formally, because like I think what was really cool about having the vinyl wrap was that my interest in art came from graffiti. So like my catalyst to art, like it wasn't through the art classes I took in high school, which is a whole other thing as to why I wanted to be an art teacher and did my education in that, was because like my art teacher just didn't inspire me at all. So grades 7 to 12 had the same art teacher, and I never thought that I liked art. I just didn't know that about myself because the art classes were so dull. And then I got into graffiti like at the age of 18. And part of that was me writing on stuff like this. It was like electrical boxes or whatever that were blank, city property, things like that. And so that is how I interacted with my city. That's how I had a relationship with my city, was through walking the streets, climbing on stuff, like at night, alone, like whatever. So I think it was like really interesting as part of like my art practice and how that's evolved and changed so much over time, of like being able to contribute to the city in a way and use some of those skills that I started learning, you know, with graffiti, and putting it into artwork that might seem more formal or traditional or academic, and then still getting it back on the street. And so it's this weird thing of like, even in a gallery setting or a traditional gallery setting, you have like this thing that's like, I'm done with the work, and now how an audience reacts with that is so different. And a lot of people take that approach of like, oh, it's not mine anymore, it's theirs. And I've always really wrestled with that, because sometimes when there is a lot of intention and meaning and someone misinterprets it, I'm feeling like, no, you didn't get it. And like, it's just always something that I've wrestled with. Like some people have that really clean break, and I've just never been able to do that. So now that this is kind of like, it's interesting just because I think there's been at least 3 different things that I've noticed how this has been like added onto, as you've mentioned, and one was within the first couple of weeks, and it was graffiti related. And it was just like a tag that went up here, and that eventually got cleaned off. And at first I was like, that's what happens. Like, I know that was a risk of what's happening, and it wasn't like, it was like, it kind of ruined the composition or whatever. Like, if you put it somewhere else, it would have made more sense. And I was like, okay, like that's just what happens. When it got cleaned off, I wasn't disappointed either, just because like I didn't feel like it was adding to it. And so like part of it is also just like my personal, especially with graffiti or as an artist or any creator, I think you have your own lines. And as a, you know, when I was doing graffiti, I wouldn't go over stuff like this. Like, and in Saskatoon, those were hand painted. They didn't have vinyl wraps, but I just did it on blank surfaces. And I'm like, this wasn't a line that I would cross, but if you were gonna do it, I was like, would have been better to do somewhere else. And then this box the city added after the wrap, so I'm not really sure what went into that, but it just became like this huge interruption that we could have accommodated for possibly, and I was like, okay, like that's just there now, and I just have to deal with it. Another thing is like on the back, there's like a sticker on there, and I support the message of the sticker, so I was like, I'm gonna leave that up, and I hope no one takes that down. And it was just kind of like, oh, I like where it is, like, I don't know. It is really different, because I don't think I've ever had anything legal on the streets before, like as a permanent fixture. Like I put my own stuff up outside of graffiti, like just put pieces of art in places that people could take home with them as like an accessible thing. But as for just like a fixed, permanent, or trying to be permanent thing, I've never really thought about like too much, like what's going to happen to it, how am I going to feel about it. I know that stuff's going to happen, but like I haven't really worked out or processed like, you know, like what's going to, like I want people to see it, obviously, and for what it was before stuff happened to it. But at the end of the day, like I think that it's, I don't know, it's tough because it's not a collaboration in the sense of like I picked my collaborators, right? But I think that anything that is in an uncontrolled environment, you have this beautiful chaos with. And again, depending on the artist that's adding to it, it might take away from my piece, or it might accentuate it and turn it into something else. And I think that's another thing, going back to like how these started as collages, 4 separate ones, and then ending up like kind of digitally putting them all into one, is that I've already got all these different contexts from everything. So to see, even if it's like the city doing it, which is frustrating, versus like an artist, like, you know, or someone who's just tagging it, or someone who's putting stickers on it for like, it's almost like a political statement, or like an economic statement. Like, I think that's really interesting. It kind of helps me not have feelings about it in a way of like, oh man, I wish it was the way I left it. I'm like, I already knew it wasn't, and now I can think of this as its own collage where other people are adding to it.